Ducks fans, are you ready? You are listening to the Ducks and Pucks podcast with your hosts, Mike Walters and Eddie Jones. This is the #1 home for Anaheim Ducks talk and analysis. Here we go.
Welcome to the show. This is your host, Mike Walters, along with my co-host, Eddie Jones, and we have some action to get to about the Ducks that we're going to cover as they go on the road. We're also going to talk about some of the upcoming games that they're going to play. We've got some injury updates, which affected the cap with the Ducks, just reported today, so we'll get to that, along with tons of fan questions. But before the Ducks went on the road, Eddie, they had one last game in Anaheim. They played Colorado. Basically blew him out of the water, especially in the third period. Jakob Silfverberg came back, ended up scoring 2 goals. Nate Thompson came back in this game as well, and the Ducks looked pretty good with a 5-1 victory over Colorado.
Yeah, and this is kind of what you've expected lately when any team faces the Avalanche. I mean, it's almost it's hard to explain how bad they really are this season until you actually watch any team play them. And it doesn't really make sense. I mean, you look at this team, and a couple seasons ago, they dominated the Western Conference. They made it to the playoffs. Obviously, they didn't go anywhere with it, but it's relatively still the same team, and it's crazy to see how bad they're doing this year and just how disorganized they are. And I don't know if that's losing Patrick Waugh at the beginning of the season and having a new coach and everything like that, but they're just awful. And the Ducks took advantage of them in this game easily. Silfverberg grabbed a goal early. Raquel had the second goal in the second period to give them the lead. They kind of fought back in the second period, had a little bit better. Rottinen scored a goal for them, but then the Ducks just took over in the third period, and Holzer gets his first goal in like 100 games or something in 2 years. So that was great. I mean, if he's going to get it against any team, it's going to be the Avalanche, and then Silfverberg had a great game this game as well. But this is a game against a team that you expected to win against, and they dominated in every aspect of this game.
Yeah, the Ducks, they played Colorado 3 times basically in the last couple weeks here, and they ended up taking all the games. They did what they needed to do and what they expected to do, like you said. Holzer got his first as a Duck, which was good to see. Rickard Rakell got his 21st, so he broke his record of 20 from last season. We even had a poll question up of how many he'll get this season. And it seems like a lot of you think between 25 and 30 seems, like an appropriate number. So we'll have to keep our eye on Raquel as he keeps doing well. And special teams were good in this game. The Ducks only had 1 power play. They converted on that. Colorado had 4 power plays. They couldn't score on any of them. So overall, just a very good effort, Eddie, before the Ducks went out on their long road trip.
Yeah, and then like you said, they go into Florida for the first game of the road trip and the first of a back-to-back against Tampa Bay the next night, and they played an okay game. They struggled to generate shots in this game, which seemed to be a trend for the first 2 games. They only had 23 shots in this game. Gibson actually saved the game for them in some aspects. They were outshot 37-23. And it was a disappointing game. I mean, I think they deserved to at least get a point out of it. They didn't play great offensively, but defensively, and obviously Gibson, they both they played great in those 2 aspects. But it's disappointing. The Panthers got a huge boost in this game. They got Barkov and Huberdeau back, arguably their 2 best offensive forwards. They got back in the same game. And it made the difference. Huberdeau scored the game-winning goal from Barkov in the second period. And it was a game that you hoped they would get 2 points, or at least a point out of. We mentioned that in the last podcast. I mean, if they could get at least a point on all these road games and maybe win one along the way, then that would be a good start to the first 3 games of the road trip. But unfortunately, they weren't able to pull it out in this game.
Yeah, I think there was a few, disappointing moments in this game. I think the power play was one of them. The Ducks had been scoring almost every game in the last week, and then this game they go, 0 for 3. They only managed 23 shots on goal total, and they almost gave up 37. Almost 40 in this game. So, that wasn't a good sign. And then Perry, we talked about, his struggles on the last podcast. And in this one, he had some chances in the third period and couldn't get it done. And we see him struggle in the Tampa Bay game, too. And we'll talk about that. We've got more fan questions about how he's not been scoring. So a little disappointing. This Florida team hasn't been playing that great. Like you said, they got back 2 of their key players, which helped them out. And, it just seemed to be the difference. I mean, the Ducks, just came up one goal short in this one, Eddie, but definitely not a 60-minute game like they could have played.
Yeah, and they're not capitalizing on the scoring chances that they have. The Reimer is known for giving up a lot of rebounds, a lot of big rebounds in front of the net, and it was mentioned in the game by the commentators, and you could see it at times during the game. They weren't able to capitalize on those chances, and it's something that's become an issue with the Ducks as of late. Either you're usually not generating a lot of shots. 23 in this one. I believe it was 16 against Tampa Bay, and they're not getting quality chances and not converting on quality chances when they have them. So I think that's the issue the Ducks as of late, and something we didn't see in the earlier part of the season, but I guess something we expected when we were evaluating this team at the beginning of the season, and now they've moved into more of a defensive team in the top 5 goals against average, penalty kills great. They're doing good defensively, but goal scoring has become a real issue for them as of late.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's been hard for them to get more than 2 goals a game. It seems like, unless they're playing Colorado. Lately it's just been kind of rough. And the other unfortunate thing happened in this game too is Sammy Vatanen got hurt. He left the game with a lower body injury. He was unable to play in the Tampa Bay game, and the Ducks ended up calling up Brandon Montour to play in that game. So he had a little bit of injury trouble. We've already got Stoner to prayer out, and we've got some updates on that as well. We'll get to in a little bit, but they had to bring up Brandon Montour. He played in the game against Tampa Bay. He got his first goal as a Duck, or first goal, in the NHL period, which was great. And the Ducks, got off to a lead in this game, but they ended up losing this one. They went to overtime. They went to shootout. They still got a point, but they lost this game. And a little bit of frustration. I mean, you look at the shots in this game; it was terrible. The Ducks only had 16 shots. They only could muster a handful after the first period. The first period they seemed to be okay, getting some scoring chances. Playing decent. They had 9 shots in that period alone, and then they could only muster 7 the rest of the game, and none in the overtime. So again, the offense was another issue in this game, Eddie. I think the Ducks were fortunate to get a point out of this one. And, the only bright spot was at least Montour came up and got his first NHL goal.
Yeah, and like so, it's a different type of game to the last one where you thought they might have deserved a point against the Panthers. And this one, they were lucky to come out with a point, only generating 7 shots through the last 2 periods and overtime of the game. Is disappointing, and it really, I mean, we know this team is bad offensively. We mentioned it before, but that's unacceptable, especially for a team that has weapons like Getzlaf, like Perry, Kessler, Raquel, Silfverberg, and you're only generating 16 shots throughout a whole game, and you had 5 power plays to go with it. I mean, it's shocking. I mean, you look at the shots that Tampa Bay was able to generate. They had 7 power plays. They ended up having 37 shots. I mean, when you have 5 power plays and you can only generate 16 shots, I mean, they're just not. I mean, just shoot the puck. At some point, you just got to shoot the puck and say, if you're not generating a lot of chances, just throw it on net. Generate shots, get rebounds, but it's just something they didn't do in this game. And obviously, like you said, they were lucky to come out with a point, and it was great for Montour to get his first goal in the NHL. But another disappointing show by the Ducks offense in this one.
Yeah, I don't know what happened these last 2 games, but it just seems like the Ducks, chances of, gone down significantly. They're not getting as many shots on net as they need to, and they just need to fire the puck more, like you said. You got to get a body in front, create a screen, and then just throw it up there. And it seems like they're not doing that. Sometimes they pass too much, or sometimes they try to, get a certain shot. And, they were a little bit unlucky in this game too. Kessler had one that went off the post in overtime. Perry had his shot go off the post on the shootout to end it. He had a chance to tie it and send it to a 5th round. So you've had a little bit of that going on in this game. But I agree with you. I mean, you're playing Tampa Bay, who's struggling this season. I mean, surprisingly, they're not up at the top like they were last year. But they're another team that's not doing well, and the Ducks couldn't take advantage in this game, Eddie.
Yeah, and really, I mean, I get it's a back-to-back, and it's hard to win these games on the back-to-back, so great getting a point. But these are 2 teams that, yeah, they are struggling, and Tampa Bay's been struggling all season. Florida's been struggling, but again, they did get Barkov and Huberdeau back, so it's understandable that was a harder game than you would have expected. But, Tampa Bay right now, they're last in the Eastern Conference, which is somewhere we didn't expect them to be. And they're not great at home. They're not great on the road. In their last 10, like we mentioned in the last podcast, they haven't been that great. And this is a game where you hoped to come away with 2 points, or at least put up an effort and show that you deserved the point that you got. So it's disappointing. And hopefully, there's the 3 games this week, and you're playing some harder teams in the Rangers and a little bit easier game in the Sabres, and hopefully they can come out in these next few games and play some strong effort.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the Ducks are still in second place. They're a couple of points behind San Jose, so it's not the end of the world. But some of these games, you want them to try and like we said, get some more offense going, and try to pick it up, especially in these 3 games coming up this next week. We've got New York, Buffalo, and Washington, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But they're not going to be all easy games, but definitely some winnable games coming up here. And we'll just have to see how they do. The trade deadline is going to come up. We're going to cover that again a little bit. I know in the last show we talked about some possible moves. And with that, we kind of have some news that goes into that as well, some injury news. We had William that asked about Dupre and Stoner and what's going on with those guys. We haven't heard anything about Dupre in a long time. Really don't know if he's going to come back, if ever. So unfortunately, there's no update on Dupre. Now, Stoner, on the other hand, there is an update. They did put Stoner on the long-term injury reserve, just like Dupre is, and the Ducks now gained some more room, almost $2.8 million in cap space here. So it's kind of a big deal, Eddie, because we talked about this on the show last week about the Ducks trying to make moves, running out of cap space with Thompson coming back. Now that we see this move, Eddie, it gives the Ducks some breathing room here to do something in the next couple of weeks or on the day of the trade deadline.
Yeah, and it's something we talked about last week, and really we wouldn't have found out about it today because the only place we found out about it was on Cap Friendly that he was on there, and nobody's made it official. I don't think I looked as far as I could look, and I didn't see anybody report it. So, for at least from Cap Friendly, he's on the long-term injury reserve, and it gives them that space now to make a move that we talked about last week. We talked about maybe trading Bernier, having to put Stoner on the long-term injury reserve, even if he wasn't fully injured. But now with him on it, they've got close to $3 million, just under in cap space. And that allows them to look at a little bit more options than we talked about last week. You can explore a trade maybe with the Avalanche. We saw Joe Sakic was at the Panthers game, which was, usually when you see GMs at games, you say, okay, maybe they're just there. Like Yzerman was there as well, and they played Tampa Bay the next day, so that is a little bit understandable. But the fact that Joe Sakic there was very interesting because Colorado had no game in the area, and they played at home the next night. So he was down there strictly to look at either players on the Ducks or on the Panthers, and it kind of leans more so towards the Ducks and with what Colorado's looking for. And maybe, that gives you the freedom now to make a trade for, say, Gabriel Landeskog or for Matt Duchene. The last I've heard, the offers or the asking price on those 2 players, especially Duchene, are insanely high from the Avalanche right now. But it gives you the possibility to look at those avenues now, and then you look at Tampa Bay again, and maybe a trade involving Palat or Johnson that kind of frees up the amount of space that you have to make a deal like that. And it also, you can look at rentals now as well. I mean, you've got $2 million in cap space. You might be able to explore an option like Thomas Vanek now, or like a guy like Drew McGinley if Colorado eats some of the salary, or Shane Doan or some of the other names that have been mentioned lately. That gives you the option to do that. So it'll be interesting to see what avenue they go to. But now, not having to do some of the things we said last week, like trading Bernier, it gives them more freedom, and I think that is big heading into the trade deadline for the Ducks.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we weren't sure if they were going to do this. We had talked about, putting other players on long-term injury reserve, and the Ducks ended up doing this with Stoner. So, he's going to be out for a little while. If you have any questions about long-term injury reserve, I do recommend going to Cap Friendly's website. If you go to capfriendly.com/LTIR-FAQ, that page really goes into a lot of it. So if you have a lot of questions on like how they do the formula and whatnot, because I am not a mathematician, so I don't understand all the math, but at least they break it down for you on there. And we know when they are on long-term injury reserve, they're due to miss 10 games in the next 24 days. So that's how far out it would be before Stoner would come back. It would be, basically almost a month. So I think the issue now is you've mentioned those other teams that, have kind of been floating out there, Eddie. And we have a lot of fan questions asking about trades and whatnot from Thomas and Mike and a couple other people that ask. And I think part of the question now is, who would the Ducks move if they try to make, some kind of deal with those teams? And I think part of the issue in this too is we don't know what the deal is with Vatanen. We mentioned his name, and he's got that lower body injury. We don't know how long he's going to be out. So, you take Stoner off the shelf. He's not going to, go anywhere, most likely. And now the question is, do you send Vatanen? Because now you've got this $2.8 million about space that's open there for the Ducks to make a move. Or do you think the Ducks may try to combo somebody? Maybe they send Vatanen and then somebody from the minors to make one of these deals.
Yeah, and there was an article that I saw on Twitter today that was referencing things said by Pierre LeBrun, that the Ducks were looking at maybe making a bigger move than we've anticipated, and maybe more than just a Theodore, a Montour, which kind of leans more. They didn't mention names, but that leans more to a move involving Sammy Vatanen, and I guess that all revolves around his health and when he can come back. But that would be the most likely option right now. I think if the Ducks want to bring in a forward that can help this team now, you have to look at Sammy Vatanen. Like you said, you're not going to move Clayton Stoner anymore to free up cap space to go for a rental or anything like that. You're not going to move Fowler. You're not going to move Lindholm. And you're not going to move any of the forwards you have right now. And that really leaves only two options. You either move Vatanen and you bring in a forward with term like James Reemsdyk or Gabriel Landeskog or Tyler Johnson or somebody of that nature that has a little bit of cap space and is an established NHL player. Or then you look at the option of maybe moving Shea Theodore or Brandon Montour and bringing in a player. It limits the amount of cap you can bring in because they're on their entry level deals. But you look at maybe bringing a guy like a William Nylander from Toronto if they're looking at trading him and swapping two entry level guys, and obviously more would go into the deal, but that would be the premise of a deal like that. And I think with Vatanen being injured, it actually gives more of a look at Brandon Montour and seeing if he is ready to fill that role. And you never want any guy to get injured, but this gives the Ducks a chance to get a longer look at Brandon Montour and see if he's ready. And from the games that we saw him play, the last game against Tampa Bay and his previous games in the season, I personally think he is ready to take that step. I don't know if he's going to be as reliable as an impact as Sammy Vatanen is on every night basis, but I don't think he's such a downgrade right now, and with his upside, that you don't explore trading Vatanen. I think that's the most likely option right now, and I think that's, if the Ducks do make a trade for a forward, he's the most likely guy to get traded in the opposite direction.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, all signs point that way. Again, there was also another article out there. I can't remember who it was that wrote it, but they again talked about Fowler and reiterated that he is not going anywhere. So you look at all the situation we have on there, and that's where it looks to. We did have another fan question about the defense and moving players from Gary, and Gary asks about Bieksa and whether or not Bieksa could be sent down to the minors. In that situation of trying to kind of bury the contract or whatnot, but that's something that you can't do. We saw Nashville do it with Ribeiro, but the Ducks can't do that. That's the part of the problem with the no movement clause. The way that works is it's not just trading that you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to put a player down in the minors without their consent. So sending Bieksa down is not an option. So, you look at the stuff out there, Eddie, like you talked about. I mean, unless, like you said, they go with a Montour, Theodore, someone down in the bottom in the minor leagues. Normally, I mean, obviously they're with the team now, but they could do that, and they have received phone calls before. We know that through this last year or so that they've gotten inquiries about those two players. That could be an option. But in looking at the defense, and hopefully Vatanen's healthy just for his own sake, but he's the one really that the spotlight's on.
Yeah, and that's kind of shifted from the offseason where the spotlight was on Cam Fowler after Vatanen was re-signed, and people saying that he's the most likely guy to get traded. But now with his play this season, I think he's as untouchable as anybody on this team right now. There's no way the Ducks are going to trade him right now. And arguably in the league right now, a right-handed defenseman is more valuable than a left-handed defenseman. And I think even with Vatanen struggling this season, his value is as high as it's going to get. I mean, unless he had 40 points this season and was playing out of his mind, then his value would obviously be higher. But it's not going to really go up more than it is right now. And I think if the Ducks want to go far in these playoffs, I mean, losing him is not going to affect you defensively in a negative way. I think Theodore and Montour can step up and fill his role in a way that's not going to hurt the Ducks in the long run. But when you're sitting 21st in the league in goals per game, you're not going to go far in the playoffs if you can't get somebody going. And obviously, we talked about Perry has to get going. Everybody else has stepped up really, and he's dropped off, and that's hurt the team. But you can't push all your problems onto Perry and say, okay, we can just wait for him to get better and we're going to be okay. Even if Perry was a little bit better, the Ducks would still be at the midway point in goals per game. And I'm not expecting them to be in the top 10 or the top 5, but when you look at every team around them with 60-plus points, they're the worst team in goals per game. They're the only team in the bottom third of the league out of all those other 11 teams. And that's a big problem. I mean, you're going to be facing some of those teams in the playoffs, especially if you go to the Stanley Cup final. You're going to be playing those Eastern Conference teams. And if you want to win the Stanley Cup, you're going to need another goal scorer. And, like we've said multiple times, the only real option to get that guy this season is to trade Sami Vatanen.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, and that's what all the signs point to. And if you want to do that, then you got Montour and Theodore to bring up, who obviously have hopefully more time in their playing career than Vatanen would have. So I agree with you there, and that kind of goes into another question too, as far as these trades and what the Ducks should do. We had James asked about whether or not the Ducks could make the Stanley Cup final, or how far would they go in the playoffs? Round 1, 2, what would they end up? And we've kind of talked about this a few times before. But given the situation, what's going on now with Vatanen being injured, the Ducks not really scoring as much, but kind of a lack of offensive opportunities on top of that. It's not just that they don't get the goals, but they're not getting as many shots on net. I think we've said this before, that the Ducks will make the playoffs. That's not an issue. They're in the running here. I wouldn't be concerned about that. But as far as them going far, it's going to be difficult, Eddie, if they don't get another scorer. And Perry continues to be subpar, because that's what he is. He's been subpar this season. The Ducks are going to have to either rely on the defense to add some more points, some other secondary scoring from the forwards, or they're going to have to ride Gibson and win games 2-1, 1-0, maybe 3-2. I mean, that's the thing you're going to have to look at is going to be tight games come playoff time if the Ducks aren't able to get another offensive weapon.
Yeah, and you look at who can step up from the way they're playing already to see if the Ducks, to see if their offense could take a step forward with who they already have. And you look at the players, Kessler, step forward from last year. Getzlaf is pretty much on par. And I guess with goal scoring, he's taken a step forward since he's come back from his injury. He's at 8 goals this season. Silfverberg a step forward. Raquel a huge step forward in his production. Fowler's been great this season. Cogliano's been good. Vermette's been better than we expected. Ritchie's taken a step forward. And we've had guys like Cramarosa and Cachet come up and done better than we expected of them. I mean, really, you can't expect more than what you're getting from those guys, because they're already producing more than we expected from them. The only guy who isn't doing what we thought is Perry, and he's not playing terrible. I mean, he has 36 points, which is third on the team. He's still producing points, but he's only got 9 goals, and that's the issue here. But even if he had 15 goals, the Ducks would still be struggling offensively, and that's where it comes in. They need that other top 6 guy, creative forward, who can either put the puck on other guys' sticks and increase their goal total, or score goals himself. And that's where the Ducks have to grab somebody at the trade deadline if they want to go all the way. I think, like you said, they can win maybe a couple rounds at most if they rely on Gibson, if they can play good defensive hockey, if they can limit a team's chances, then maybe they can win a couple rounds. But a lot of things would have to go right for the Ducks to win the Stanley Cup with the team that they have right now. And with the goal scoring output that they have from this team right now, it's you're going to go up against teams like Pittsburgh and Washington in the Stanley Cup final. In the West, you're going to go against Chicago, Minnesota. You're going to go against the Sharks. You're going to go against teams that score goals on a regular basis every night. And eventually you're just not going to be able to defend them. You're going to have to outgun some teams, and right now the Ducks aren't able to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you look at the Ducks roster. I mean, only one guy has more than 20 goals. That's Rickard Rakell. I mean, your next closest is Kessler, who's got 18. Obviously Silverberg's healthy and back. He got those couple now. He's at 15. So you got those three, but after that, it falls off. I mean, you have Richie at 11, Cogdano at 10, and Perry at 9. So, I mean, it's a little bit of a drop there. There's not as much, like you said. And if the Ducks are going to try and get it done, I agree. I think they're going to have to try to make some kind of move. I think it's good news that they put Stoner on the LTIR, not for his sake, obviously, and his health, of course, but in terms of the Ducks trying to make a move and bring in somebody, that gives them some wiggle room, as you talked about, looking at these other teams, especially Tampa Bay and Colorado with Sakic and Yzerman, going to the game. That kind of comes up. I know you and I talked about Detroit before, which, maybe with their cap situation might not quite work out, even though we had talked about Tatar and Nyquist, which are other ones that may have been helpful to the Ducks. So I would keep the eyes open now. The situation's changed in the last week from when you and I had talked, and at least now we can look at the Ducks and go, okay, what is Murray trying to work on? We mentioned Bernier and signing all the other goalies. Last time, which now with this space, that's probably less likely this week now going forward. And I think, like you said, that the Ducks will probably make a move to bring in a forward. And like we said, the depth's at the blue line. Even with Dupre and Stoner out, there's still room to do something, move one of those guys and bring it forward. And I really think that the Ducks are able to do a move. I mean, I don't expect them to do a whole lot at the trade deadline still, but I believe that that's the most likely scenario.
Yeah, and I'm kind of in the same boat where I don't expect them to make a huge move, but there is the chance this season. There is the making of a big move that changes the outlook of this team. I mean, the Ducks have the ability and they have the assets to trade for a forward that's not only going to help them now, but that's going to be a part of this team for the future. And the Ducks have to start trending towards that direction. They have a ton of great young defensemen. They have obviously Lindholm and Fowler, who we now expect here to be long for the foreseeable future. He's already signed for the next 6 years, and assuming Fowler will get a new contract at the end of the 2018-19 season. But you have got to start making room for guys like Brandon Montour and Shea Theodore. And the Ducks have the opportunity to move a guy like Sammy Vatanen, as great as he is and as great as he's been for this team, to bring in a young forward like, say, a Gabriel Landeskog or somebody of that nature, who is going to be able to help this team now. And he's, for example, with Gabriel Landeskog, he's only 24. He's going to be with this team when the core of this team dies out, and you can start to build around a player like that and bring in other pieces to transition this team into the next coming season. So I think if you're going to make a move like this, you have to either do it right now at the trade deadline and make this team better now, or at the draft. And ideally, I would like to see them do it at the deadline. I think it's difficult, but there's not a lot of times where a player of that caliber and like Duchesne and Landeskog and some of the other names that have been mentioned this season, of those guys that are available and that you have the ability to make that trade. Both of these teams have the pieces that each team wants. So, you can't wait too long and risk that he's not going to be available when you want to make that trade. And I think the Ducks can't pass up on an opportunity like that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I hope that they do make some kind of move like that, especially with Colorado. Colorado's total rebuild mode. I mean, that's what they're going to, be and head and, do next season too, probably, unfortunately for them. But they're going to have to figure out their team situation. They're going to have to unload some players with some of the cap. And those names have floated around, like you said, for the last, month or two now. So, I mean, is it going to happen? We don't know. But, I mean, that's a good situation if the Ducks can work that out. Because like we said, with Perry struggling and only a handful of the guys really producing the goals, that's what the Ducks are going to need. And that's what's going to get them from, going into the playoffs and going out in the first or second round, as opposed to getting to the Stanley Cup final.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see. It's going to be a crazy month for the Ducks. I mean, we talked about how last deadline was going to be a crazy deadline for the Ducks, but this one, with the players that are available and with the moves that the Ducks have the ability to make, I mean, this is going to be an intense one. I mean, I hope this one is more exciting through the first couple hours than it was last season. I mean, for last trade deadline, we were sitting there for about 5 hours waiting for the Ducks to
Yep.
do anything. Literally waiting for anything to happen. It was a pretty boring trade deadline last year. But with some of the names available this year, especially with the center of attention going to be the Colorado Avalanche, and the fact that the Ducks are in the mix on those two players, I think it'll be exciting. I mean, hopefully something gets done, and we get to have a little bit more excitement for the first few hours of this trade deadline this year. I don't think I can take another one where we're sitting there for 5 hours twiddling our thumbs talking about a minor league trade between two other teams.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, February 28th is the deadline. Eddie and I will be available. We're maybe going to do a live show. We're not sure yet. We're trying to look at some options. Some of the stuff that we used in the past is actually extinct. So we'll look and see. If not, we'll definitely be on Twitter and Facebook posting updates and all that kind of stuff. And we'll obviously have a podcast show for sure going about it. But as the next weeks come, we'll talk about it more and more and provide some updates and go into it. And like you said, yeah, I hope something happens, and I hope it's not, the Ducks make a couple moves in the last second and they're just so moves. So with that, we'll catch up on all of that at the end of the month. And the Ducks are still on the road trip. They still got 4 more games to go here. They're going to be playing the New York Rangers, Buffalo, and Washington. So it's still not an easy trek ahead of the Ducks, Eddie. I mean, New York's a team that they're playing okay. They're not playing great, but they're still in the mix in the East. You got Buffalo, who's not been playing as well, and that's probably a game that we'd hope the Ducks get 2 points out of. And then they've got Washington, who of course has just been dangerous as ever.
Yeah, and this game to start this week against the Rangers is going to be a tough one. And yes, they've been struggling compared to their early season form, and they're not so great at home. They're a lot better on the road, which is actually surprising. It's something you don't see from a lot of teams. That they're 18-7 on the road, which is amazing. Like, I think that's probably the league best on the road in the NHL. And then their home record is only 15-11-1. So I mean, it doesn't. Any team, especially going into MSG, it's going to be a tough game, and against the Rangers, who are just a team that can score a ton of goals this season. Sitting second in goals per game for a reason, so it'll be a tough one. I think it'll be a defensive battle. The Ducks are going to have to try and contain some of the Rangers stars like Rick Nash and Mika Zibanejad and Derek Stepan, and they've got a lot of offensive weapons on this team, and you would expect that Henrik Lundqvist will be in goal, so it'll be a tough battle. It'll be I think it will come down to key chances in this game. If the Ducks can score on those chances, we talked about it in the game against Florida and the game against Tampa Bay. They need to put away chances that they have. We talked about Perry missing the open net, the hitting posts and whatnot. So I think it's going to come down to contributing on those key chances if they're going to beat the Rangers in this first game.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what they need to do. They need to cash in on the chances. I mean, against the Rangers and the rest of these teams. I mean, Buffalo is the one that they'll play after that. They're struggling. They're in 7th place in the Atlantic. They haven't been doing as well. That's one that, I'd hope the Ducks pull out 2 points in that one. But you never know. Buffalo just, blew away Ottawa 4-0. So, you just never know what's going to happen. When you play on any given night. Definitely Washington is going to be a big test for the Ducks. That's going to be a tough one. Also with, as we said, with Vatanen out, look to maybe see Montour playing some of these games or Theodore playing some of these games and get some more experience, especially on Montour. He's looking good, especially with the slap shot that he put for his goal. So, and it doesn't get any easier after Washington too, Eddie. The Ducks will finish the road trip against Minnesota, and the Ducks dropped those games that they played against the Wild earlier this season. So these next 4 games are going to be a big test for the Ducks. You'd hope that they'd come out with points, like I said, against Buffalo, but New York, Washington, and Minnesota are all going to be tough games.
Yeah, and this I think, is a turning point for the Ducks if they're in their pursuit for a player in a trade. I think if they struggle to score goals against some of these top teams like the Rangers and the Capitals and the Wild, if they continue to struggle and not be able to produce in games against top opponents in the league, I think that's a turning point for them to say, hey, we've got to make a deal here if we're going to push and win a Stanley Cup. And we know they're all in this season. They have to be. I mean, you look at the team and the core is aging. They've only got a couple seasons left where this cup window is going to stay open for us with Getzlaf, Perry, and Kessler. So these next three, I guess Buffalo as well, but especially the 3 games against the top teams, this is a defining point for them. And if they struggle in these games, I think we could definitely see a big change, especially coming towards the trade deadline.
Yeah, and with that, the trade deadline is, it's almost 3 weeks away to the day. So it's coming up here. And like we said, we think the playing field's kind of changed a little bit with Stoner on the LTIR. Looks like there's some more room and some stuff that could happen, as we talked about in the show. And we'll be back next week with another one. And hopefully, the Ducks pull out some of these games and score a little bit more goals, get some more shots on net. And we'll cover it all for you and answer your questions as well. So see you in a week. Let's go Ducks.